Welcome everybody to Captain's Table. Welcome to our regulars. Thank you very much. Welcome to those of you that haven't been to Captain's Table before. It's great that you're attending. We try to give you some very impactful, high value content that's relevant to today's market and an opportunity for you to get to know some of your colleagues in the industry. Obviously, conferencing is not really possible at the moment in many parts of the country, so it's really good that we can still utilise technology to get together. And Captain's Table's been going on and off since way back in 1998. In this format, it's been going about 4 years. As you can see, it's brought to you with the very great support of our sponsors. We've got JobAdder, Ayers Group, A Positive, DigitPro, and William Buck, Chartered Accountants and Advisors. Without them, we couldn't be keeping Captain's Table happening and sourcing such good speakers for you. So thank you to all our supporters. And it brings me great pleasure to introduce our guest presenter today, who's Anthony Sork. Now, Anthony and I met way back, we're trying to work it out, back in the late 90s. He doesn't look as long in the tooth as me and some of the rest of us on the call today, but he actually started his recruitment career with Select in their graduate recruitment program in 1995. So he really knows our industry well. He now consults to the industry, but also at client side as well. And he's here to speak with us about staff retention and performance, which is in the top 3 key ingredients of a successful recruitment company, not only for you, for your recruitment companies, but also for you to have this conversation with your clients. So, Anthony, over to you. I'm going to pass over to you, and thank you very much for joining us, and looking forward to your presentation today.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. And I'm just going to swap over and bring up my my slide deck. So I'm hoping this is going to appear for everyone. I'm hoping everyone can see a title page there with a very long title that's flashed up there. But thank you all very much for being on this session today, and Tony, to you for inviting me to come and present. The Captain's Table has been a group that I've been aware of and heard a great deal about over many years, and always just such positive things. And I feel it's a bit of a privilege to have been asked to come and speak to this group. And out of respect for the experience in this group, my recruitment experience, I'm very passionate about this topic, but I'm also very passionate about the recruitment industry. I've been connected to it since the beginning of my working career. As Tony said, back in 1995, I had an opportunity to be part of, at that stage, the Select recruitment program, which was, the graduate program, which at the time we understood was the first and only graduate program operating in the industry. And I got a chance to go through that program with some pretty fantastic people that are still involved, many of them in the industry, or have gone on to take on senior positions within larger organisations in various industries as well. So I feel very privileged to have had my foundational learning experience post-university in the recruitment industry, and in that way. I got a chance to experience all of the different moving parts of a reasonably large recruitment organisation at that stage, and that's before they went through all of their evolutions. I've always stayed close to the industry and continue to work with a number of providers in the industry as well. So thank you again for allowing me to present to you. I know a bit, but I certainly don't position myself to be an expert in all things in the recruitment industry. And I'm really interested to get your feedback after the session today about how this subject matter area fits with both your organisations, but also with what you see in terms of the way you're positioning your organisations to deliver services to your market, to your clients as well. So I've had the privilege over the last really 15, maybe a little bit more years now. Yes, the grey hair is starting to show for me as well. Do forgive the lockdown haircut. I am in Sydney and in an LGA that we're in week 15, I think, possibly coming into 16 soon. So I've been getting a bit of stick about my my retro hairdo here. I did say to Tony, please make fun of it if you'd like, but apparently the sort of the old rocker style is coming back in, and I think he's trying to model that as well a little bit at the moment. In terms of this topic area, it's something that I am very passionate about. I work with lots of different organisations. I get a chance to speak on internationally, and I'm hoping today that you're able to engage with it from the two perspectives. So from the perspective of being a business leader, where you're looking at this subject relative to your own internal workforce, but also to challenge our thinking relative to what does our understanding of this topic mean relative to the kind of services and the kind of relationships that we want to strike and form with our clients as well. In an age where there is continuous pressure for us to determine what kind of relationship we want to have with our clients, whether it's transactional, whether it's more of that opportunistic problem solving, repeating problem model, or whether it's more sort of pushing into that strategic partnership model. I think that, relative to what you want to create in terms of the client experience with your clients, that'll determine how you engage with this topic and support your consultants to potentially work with their clients maybe in a little bit of a different way. So I'll touch back in on that towards the end of the session. I kind of just want to get into the subject matter proper and really talk from your own workforce perspective and from a leadership perspective, so that you can sort of wrap your head around the concept, and then we'll sort of finish off tying it back into your business model from there. So I'm hoping that in steering this, I'm going to be able to move slide by slide. All right, so I wanted to share first this leadership effectiveness and organisation potential model. Now, part of my practice is that we work with a large range of organisations in leadership behavioural impact. So we work in culture transformation, culture enhancement through leadership behavioural impact. And one of the big areas that there's often some ambiguity in, but also a tendency to focus any kind of development within an organisation typically drifts towards competency and skill development, and that includes leadership development as well. And certainly it's a very important aspect of leadership effectiveness is ensuring that you have leaders who are competent and capable in the skills that they require relative to being able to create and implement a strategy in terms of being able to support the operating model of the organisations, the structures, the tactics and the systems, and all of the skills that are required to do that effectively. It's really important that organisations are constantly evaluating that and determining any skill gap opportunities for people to plug those gaps. But unfortunately for most organisations, they typically focus there as the primary focus of development at all levels of the organisation, but also within leadership development. And yet we know, and there is extensive research to show that that kind of just gets you in the game of being a competent and capable leader. But we have all probably at points in our careers worked for leaders who we would regard as competent and capable, but are actually behaviourally destructive. And so the other side of the leadership effectiveness model is really linked to the leadership thinking, motivation and behavioural impact of leaders. And so combining both competency and behaviour to determine what kind of impact do individual leaders and we as leadership teams have on our organisation culture and operating team climates. So whether that's a leadership team or whether that's actually a functional operating team, and then the flow-on effect of that behavioural, that leadership effectiveness, including behavioural impact on engagement and emotional bonds, on motivation and energy within the organisation as to whether it's predominantly energy and motivation throughout the organisation is extrinsic and reliant on management drive, or whether through leadership we are switching on intrinsic motivation and energy sources that is powered by the collective. The leadership behavioural element has a large impact on what kind of business that we actually are, and then the flow-on effect to our perspective around standards and performance. Are we striving for standards of excellence or standards of adequacy? or are we an environment that is in constant fear of falling short of performance standards as well, which ultimately determines what we would regard as being the sustainable levels of satisfaction and energy or momentum within the organisation as well. So we do a lot of work in that space with our clients, and I wanted to share that model with you as a starting point today to get you to maybe just ponder that within your own organisations, regardless of your size. I mean, you can be a 2 structural level organisation through to a 7 structural level organisation. Leadership effectiveness is something that should be considered regardless of your size and your structure. And I wonder right now whether we feel that we ourselves, but also those that sit in leadership positions within our organisations at all levels, whether we feel that we have got people who are competent and capable, they can execute on the skill component of their roles, but what is the behavioural impact of those leaders? What is that doing to their effectiveness, our effectiveness, and the impact on our organisation potential? Very happy to speak with anyone after the session today if there's any part of that model that you want to explore a little bit more and understand. But look, it all does commence at the top of this model with clarity and understanding of our purpose and our mission, and what is it that we're striving to achieve. And then certainly from that behavioural perspective is absolutely underpinned by our principles and values. And I imagine that most of you as organisations have got a pretty clear set of statements in that regard, either your purpose or your vision and your values. Sometimes those things, often those things can end up being placards on a wall or in an annual statement of some kind, but aren't truly engaged with, or they fail to meet the test of actually being lived within the organisation. And so I'd recommend to you all as a bit of a reflection is to go back and have a look at that and sort of say, where does that sit for us? Do we need to reinvigorate that, realign ourselves and our people to that? And how do we want to then use that to guide leadership effectiveness in our organisation as well? Okay, so that to the side, and it'll kind of make sense as to why I've probably started with that in a little while. I want to now sort of get into this whole space of emotional bonds and how they impact individuals throughout the employee life cycle. And so I've had the wonderful opportunity to be a leading researcher in this space, and someone who's had a chance to work with some people who are far cleverer than me and sort of go along the ride for a little bit in terms of researching this phenomenon, which is called attachment, social attachment. And so the research that I've done in that space and what's then been built on that work flowing through to understanding beyond that initial bonding attachment period, how the emotional bonds throughout the life cycle affect retention and performance of talent is what I wanted to share with you all today. I wanted to start with a little bit of 101 on neuropsych and the social brain. So human beings as creatures that walk the earth, like many species, are actually innately social creatures. We are a social species. And so we are neurologically geared and wired to seek out and become part of social structures. So human beings, those that were not, if we think about way back when at the beginning of time, those that did not find and seek out and join larger groups of people often found themselves in peril and probably didn't survive, at least to the extent of passing on their gene pool. And so as a species, like many species that are social and socially inclined creatures, we've evolved as a social species. And so that as a principle is really important for us to recognise that throughout the course of our lives, literally from the moment we're born, we have this sort of wiring that's geared towards connecting to social structures. And it happens immediately as we come into our very first social structure, whatever we define as the family unit, and they come in all shapes and sizes. But we have an infant that at that point in time is predisposed to wanting to connect and bond. And then we form these social influences and social structures around them that they engage with and learn how to fit into those social structures effectively. So when we look at the social brain, there are three main functions of the social brain that I just want to connect us to. The first is social perception. So how do we perceive the world around us and bring bring the world around us into our social brain. And we do that through our senses, right? Through our sight, through our smell, through our taste, through our touch, through our hearing. Our brains are actually constantly alert and active. Even when we are asleep, we have a brain that is functioning and is alert. Part of our fight-flight mechanism response is that it's constantly alert to the environment that we're in. And so we are taking social cues into our brain at all times. And certainly from a social perspective, we are being keenly attentive to other people that are part of our world and part of our lives, and interpreting or bringing in the social cues that we are trying to process. And so that's the second function of the social brain. We bring those perceptions in. Then we have what's called social inference, which is as human beings, we are recognized as having higher cognitive function than other species, than many other species. And our cognitive interpretation in the social brain is such that we are not limited by just interpreting the social perceptions of just one person's behavior at a time. We have the ability to interpret quite complex social interactions from multiple sources at the same time. But our brain is doing that based on our life experience to date. And we are trying to bring meaning to the things that we are perceiving at that point in time. And then the third function from there, so if we bring perceptions in, we make meaning of it, then the third function is then we then have a behavioural response. So what is our social behavioural response? And in that space, our behavioural response space, we have a combination of conditioned behaviour as well as conscious chosen behavior if we are attentive to it and aware of it. And it's one of the things that elevates us in the animal kingdom, is that the rest of the animal kingdom is predominantly their behavior is conditioned response. Whereas human beings have a more highly evolved function, which is actually to be strategic in our behavior. When we choose to, we can choose our behavior in any moment rather than just rely on conditioned behavioral response. And so without going any further into a little bit of that sort of 101 psych sort of journey, recognizing that each of us and our social brains are constantly active, and that we are operating with this at all points in time, even right now. As well as that we are operating in environments, organisations, as well as in all other aspects of our lives, where everyone else around us also has a social brain that is active as well. It'll become clearer in a little while why leadership behavioural impact, though, has a more significant weight in terms of affecting people's social inference and indeed impacting their behaviour. So when we have a look at the way we carry ourselves as leader, the weight of that relative to the people that are in the social structure with us are more attentive to that, and they place a higher weighting on their perceptions of how we're carrying ourselves as leaders as well. All right, so then taking the social brain understanding and us as social creatures, and then looking at the way that we as human beings actually form and then sustain emotional bonds with social structures throughout our lives. Part of the research that I was absolutely not part of, but we sort of stood on the shoulders of very clever people, were those that came before us that have done extensive research in filial bonding, which is essentially looking at the emotional bonding mechanism that takes place across the animal kingdom outside of the human species. And for anyone who has spent time growing up on a farm, I grew up on a farm in Midwest, well, Liverpool Plains, actually, up and around Corindai area. I don't know if anyone's familiar up around that area, but having grown up on a farm at a very young age, I witnessed when this bonding occurred successfully, but also what happened when the bonding actually failed to occur across the animal species that we had around us. And so for those of you that have lived on farms or been around them, you'll know that if it fails to take place, that initial bonding mechanism between offspring and parent, if that fails to take place and you don't intervene, then the offspring perishes. So often there are if you've watched movies or depictions of kids on farms growing up, often you'll see those pictures of kids walking around with like a lamb or a calf under their arm and a baby's milk bottle feeding the baby. That happens when this filial bonding mechanism fails to take place. And so this is a phenomenon that actually crosses over the entire animal kingdom. It is really highly pronounced across bird species. And so one of the famous theorists in this space was a guy called Lorenz, and there are pictures of him walking around his farm in southern France with trails of ducks and geese following behind him, because what he did was help to build awareness of and popularize the understanding of this bonding mechanism that actually took place. And he was a very influential person in filial bonding. There were a number of people then who came along after him who then said, well, okay, how does this actually relate to the human species? And so where it gets the label of attachment is actually when we have a look at essentially filial bonding within the human species. And many of you, if you are parents or aunts or uncles, you will have come across some pretty strong influences of early childhood development that's based in attachment theory. So not to make anyone sort of go into a fetal position and rock in the corner, taking you back into those deep dark times if you've got children, of thinking about the Karatani controlled crying technique, for example, when you're helping children to settle and become, feel that feeling of safe and comfort and gradually comfortably go off to sleep. There's a technique that's based in attachment theory that actually supports that as well. When we have a look at attachment theory within the human species, again, the work by Mary Ainsworth and Balby and Shaver and a number of other really clever people that focused on attachment in early childhood development. And there's some brilliant models and brilliant articles to read if you're interested in that. What we did is we came along and we said, well, look, attachment is clearly a phenomenon that takes place, but rather than it being a one-to-one phenomenon, a parent to offspring phenomenon, we believe that it is actually a one-to-many phenomenon. So it is actually both a one-to-one, but also a one-to-many. And so that individual to social structure phenomenon, we talk about it from an early childhood development, the individual bonds not just to the primary parent, the primary carer parent, but also bonds to the family unit. So it bonds to potentially the other parent, if there is one, siblings, if there are siblings, the family dog, if the family dog's part of the social structure, and then the extended family structure that steps out from there as well, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and so forth. And then we said, well, yeah, okay, that does make sense, but also the early childhood development is not the only stage in our lives where we are actually joining and forming relationships with social structures throughout the course of our life. In fact, our life is actually littered with a series of social structures that we actually become part of, whether it's into community, whether it's into education, whether it's into other kinds of services, and certainly, absolutely, within our employment and career pathways as well. And so what then we set about doing was exploring, understanding, and then being able to demonstrate how attachment as a phenomenon has a significant role to play in the way that individuals join a workplace social structure, the time frame that those attachment perceptions actually form, and then the impact of the relative strength of those attachment perceptions, the impact that has on the likelihood that talent will stay or leave. And then if they stay, what level of discretionary effort and contribution will they make to the social structure that they're actually part of? And so, as I said, there are lots of different social structures that we are all part of. We call, from simple and fleeting, meeting a stranger on the street who's looking for directions. Absolutely, that is a moment where a social structure forms. It's only two people, but it's two or more people who come together for a shared purpose for a defined period of time. In that instance, the behavioural conduct of the other party is going to, as well as ourselves, is going to have a determination of how long that interaction lasts and whether in fact we're able to achieve something effectively together. And so even in something as fleeting as a meeting a stranger on the street, through to every phone call or every interaction or every webinar that we're part of each day, there is a bonding period that determines whether we stay in or get out. And I'm glad to see that I haven't seen the numbers on this session go down yet, so thank you. But also, if we stay in, what level of effort are we applying to processing and understanding and contributing to that social structure as well? Okay, so with that in mind, I'll move on. The why does it matter? Just to reiterate, it's going to impact. So social structure attachment, workplace attachment, is going to absolutely impact the retention of talent. So how we go about bringing people in and bonding them will impact the retention of that talent. It'll impact the effort that people actually apply. It'll impact their performance through that discretionary effort, and it also will contribute to the way in which we are able to build a people-centric, relationship-centric culture within our organisations as well. Now, the emotional bond, the formation of the emotional bond is vital. It's a critical phase, but it's not the only phase of what we look at when it comes to the emotional bonds throughout the employee life cycle. And so the employee life cycle model that we have developed has 5 distinct phases to it. And I encourage everyone to think about this relative to what we commonly refer to as engagement. So often, I mean, engagement is a terminology. It's a very powerful, I love the terminology engagement for many reasons, but I also really despise it as well, because unfortunately, as an umbrella term, engagement has helped organizations understand why the emotional connection of an individual to the entity with whom they're involved, being that rational, logical, and emotional, why that connection has an impact on the way in which that person sort of leverages discretionary effort and performance across the organisation. And so some great organisations have done some great work over many years building awareness of engagement, but what it's done is actually also diluted our awareness of how engagement actually needs to be measured and managed and understood separately across each of the distinct stages of the employee life cycle. And so the work that we started in attachment helped us to really start to build out that understanding of organisations to say, yes, overarching engagement important, but let's actually understand this, measure and manage it separately depending on what stage of the employee life cycle our people are at. And so there are 2 outer stages that are when people are not directly employed by us, but they are still part of the 5 stages of the employee life cycle. And the first one is the pre-employment stage. And we, as an industry, we are absolutely involved in this stage. So the pre-employment stage for any employer is actually all about their employer brand value in the marketplace. So what does their employer brand value do for them in terms of attracting prospective talent from the marketplace to want to apply when an opportunity is there for them to, go through a recruitment process and seek to join the organisation. So that pre-employment phase is actually a distinct phase. It can be influenced, but it's more difficult to measure and manage because it's before we're actually aware of who these people are. But from a recruitment industry perspective, it's certainly something that we have a line of sight to, and it will determine, how effectively we're able to attract talent to us, for us then to be able to potentially put them forward to our clients as well. So I'm going to come back to that at the end of this session and just sort of touch on it a little bit. The other end of the employee life cycle, which is the post-employment phase, is once someone has left our employment but is still connected to us as a social structure, still connected to us as an organisation. And that phase is increasing in its importance and significance for organisations, particularly in a talent short market where there are industries and there are certain skill sets where people may join and work with an organisation for a period, leave, but there is a greater likelihood that we'll be able to attract them back, so boomerang that talent back to be able to work another stage of their career back with us as well. And so the post-employment stage becomes important strategically for us in a talent short market, but it also is very strategically important for organisations because that group of people has the second greatest influence on your current employer brand in the marketplace as well. So people who used to work for you, what they say about you as an employer actually has a massive impact on your employer brand, second only to the people who are currently working for you as well. And so these two distinct phases, we need to be aware of them. We need to be attentive to them. There is more we can do with them. And so for you as an employer yourself, you should give consideration to that, because I know a lot of people operate in the recruitment industry, but when we talk about top talent in the recruitment industry, it's a talent short market. Right, there's plenty of people who come and go in this industry, and there are plenty of people who can, kind of do the job. But when it comes to those career recruiters, those people that are the top talent in the market, that's a really small talent pool. And so we need to be mindful of that relative to the talent that we're trying to access for our own organizations, but also mindful of this relative to how we're offering insights to our clients about the way in which they go about bringing people into the organization, and really importantly, the way they go about actually helping people to transition out of their organizations. And we know this, we could have an interaction with any commercial offering, and we could have had a pretty good experience, but at the end of that relationship, if we feel disrespected or mistreated at the end of that relationship, that'll pretty much put an end to the likelihood that we'll go back, even though the rest of the experience may have actually been quite good. That final experience actually has a significant impact on whether we will be an advocate of that organization and their services, and whether we would consider going back ourselves at the end. And so that phase of the post-employment is going to be heavily impacted by the final stage that I've got there in blue, which is the detachment phase, while they're still employed with us. So it's the final stage of their direct employment with us in terms of the employee lifecycle. So I want to talk about these three stages now. Started talking about attachment. I've given you some insight to detachment, and there's a big section in the middle which is connection as well. So I'm going to move on to that. I'm very mindful. I'm a fast talker. My energy and my enthusiasm gets the better of me sometimes, but I hope I'm going at a pace and a level of energy that's okay for everyone. Please, Tony, if anyone's sort of saying on the chat, hey mate, how many cups of coffee have you got? Can you slow it down a little bit for us today? Please let Tony know, and he'll let me know to slow it down for you. But I hope I'm going at an okay pace for everyone at the moment. All right, just to reconnect us, and these slides are going to be available to you afterwards as well, just to reconnect us to this concept of attachment. So it's the critical phase at the beginning of an employee joining a new social structure, joining a new workplace. The work that we did focused on permanent employment, but what I can say to you is that what we have seen since actually being in this space and measuring it out in the marketplace for many years now is that we are able to also measure, and I believe it's worthwhile measuring and managing this perception absolutely for people that are going into organizations on contracts of 6 months or more. And that's the measurement and management piece. But I need to let you know that this actually, as a phenomenon, has a massive impact on a temporary worker that might only be going into a client site for a day. If you've got a receptionist that might be going into a client site only for one day, the way that they actually behave and create that attachment experience for that temporary receptionist at the beginning of that day is going to significantly impact the way in which that person feels that they actually want to stick out the assignment or not. And we've all experienced some people who've turned up and then left within a couple of hours afterwards based on what they've seen and experienced. Doesn't happen often, but it does happen. But the way that they feel emotionally connected to the organization or the team that they're part of, and then the discretionary effort they're going to show, even in that one-day assignment. So attachment as a phenomenon takes place in all social structures. The length of time of the critical attachment period varies depending on how long the individual feels that they are going to be part of that social structure. And so for people who are joining an organization on a contract of 6 months or more, or those that are joining on a permanent basis, the critical attachment period for those people is the first 120 days of employment. And that's from the day they commence. Now there is a stage, a pre-employment stage, and the stage that is the recruitment process that is bolted onto that, and that is variable. but the clock starts from the day they commence, and you've got 120 days to impact the core perceptions of attachment. Now, these 4 core perceptions are the same 4 core perceptions, whether we're joining a gym, whether we're being part of a new social group, whether we're joining a membership organisation, or whether we're part of a networking group like Captain's Table. The 4 core perceptions that are the foundation of attachment are security, trust and value, acceptance and belonging. And if there's nothing else out of today that you take away, please go away and give consideration to that. When people engage with us as an organisation, whether they are employees, whether they are candidates, or whether they are new customers, new clients, what are we doing at the beginning of our relationship with those people to influence their 4 core perceptions: security, trust and value, acceptance and belonging, within a critical attachment period for those groups? For employees with us, you got 120 days. Yeah. For employees that you're placing with your clients, they've got 120 days. And so what do we do during that 120 days that's going to have the greatest influence on those 4 core perceptions? There is no escaping the role of the primary carer. So the primary carer is the one-up manager. So the person that I report through to, the person that I perceive is responsible for my safety and my well-being, and for helping me understand what is expected of me, what is it that I can do to contribute to this organisation, and for it to for me to feel like I'm part of contributing to it achieving its purpose. So whoever that person is to me, that direct person, is my primary carer. In some organisations, that's blurred. So we work with, for example, some sporting organisations where they've got a few different people that are kind of involved in this stage, and that line of who's my primary carer is kind of blurred a little bit. We worked with a financial institution at one point in time, and I'm not talking about matrix reporting lines, which is a whole nother story, which can blur it as well, but they have people who come in and are staged through different stages in the first 12 months where they have a different primary carer. When we focus on attachment for a new employee, it's whoever in that first 120 days is the person that they perceive as their primary carer that has the greatest impact. After that, if a person then should join a new internal social structure at any point in their career, if they have a new primary carer, you are essentially resetting the attachment bonding period for that person as well. And so you might have someone join an organisation and it fails to that failure to attach, that fail or you can attach or perish type of filial bonding concept actually does happen in workplaces as well. So we see often people join, the dynamic, the chemistry between that person and the manager is just poor. And we kind of then are faced with, well, what do? Do we just run the risk that we're going to lose this person or battle on? One of the options you do actually have available to you is actually to change their primary carer relationship, if that's available, and that will reset the attachment bonding period of that individual as well. Something I just want to emphasize for you is that attachment has no correlation to competency. So you could have the most competent and capable, skilled person in the marketplace join your team, but end up with low attachment, and vice versa. You could hire someone who is completely lacking, I hope not, but could be completely lacking in skill and capability to do the job they've been hired into, but they could end up very highly attached. And so attachment and competency need to be seen as 2 separate things. But we do want to make sure that if we've got a highly competent and skilled individual, we also want to have a high level of attachment, because it's that if we don't, then the risk of attrition of that individual goes up over the first 18 months. And the lower the attachment, no matter how high the competency is, the lower the attachment, the lower the discretionary effort and contribution of that individual as well. So the goal here is to hire well, skill, capability and experience, hire well, and then focus during this critical attachment period, this first 120 days, of ensuring that you are able to achieve the strongest bond possible based on security, trust and value, acceptance and belonging. Now, to give you a line of sight a little bit deeper than that, the research we have done based on employment environments, there are 20 environmental drivers that you should be attentive to, that your primary carers should be attentive to during that first 120 days. And I've listed those down the right-hand side there of that slide for you. If you're interested in learning more about that, understanding more about that, very happy to speak to you further after today. But conceptually, if you can at least take away from this part of the presentations, those 4 core perceptions and the understanding that there is a critical bonding period, that critical attachment period that we need to be attentive to, both for employees, candidates, and clients as well. All right, I need to move on because otherwise Tony's going to wrap me up or hook me off the slide, that's the screen. Let me move on to the middle part of the emotional bonding relative to the employee life cycle, and this is connection. So this would cater for the majority of our workforce. So post 120 days, so once an individual is through 120 days, they then are in the phase called the connection phase. And look, connection's a word that's being used quite a lot at the moment. And in the concept of the challenging times that we've all been living through, what I think has happened is that there's been a greater level of awareness of the role that emotional connection, social connection can play on whether someone how someone's feeling, and then how someone is actually self-managing and performing in their roles when we can't actually be in the same physical environment. And there are organisations that have had to contend with this for a long period of time, where they've got remote workforces or workforces that are working in mobile conditions. But for the majority of the marketplace, it's the first time that we, as a majority of the marketplace who has previously had experiences where people have been working in the same physical environment as us, that we've had to understand and experience that difference between people who have a high feeling of emotional connection and sustaining that, and the way that they are self-managing, intrinsically motivated and performing, versus what happens when someone stops feeling emotionally connected, and what happens to their performance, their contribution, their mental health, and ultimately the risk that they may actually choose to leave as well. So I would say it's not a COVID phenomenon that we should focus on this. It's an all the time phenomenon. It's just heightened our understanding of it and the importance of this during this period of time. But how do we understand or wrap our heads around this as a phase, and what do we want to look for in your people relative to this stage? Less line of sight to this relative to the candidates you're placing. So once the candidates you're placing are through that 120-day period, less line of sight to this, though I would argue relative to your relationship with your candidates, we need to extend ourselves beyond that. We're only interested in you when you're an active candidate for us. We need to move far more towards this sort of career commitment relationship with our candidates who sort of are with us actively, then their insights and potentially clients, and then back with us actively. I think we need to, as an industry, give greater consideration to connection to our candidates, regardless of what phase they're in. But certainly from an internal employee perspective, I encourage you to think about this relative to your teams. So when we look at and want to measure and understand connection, what we're looking for out of these dynamic forces called push and pull forces. And so from an emotional bonding perspective, at all times, each one of us, as well as each of our people, have got these push and pull forces that are playing inside of us on any given day. And so a push force are those things that I'm not satisfied with, that are important to me, that are causing me to feel more inclined to feel like I'm not enjoying, or I don't like this part of being a part of this social structure. And so they have a push away from us effect. And then our pull forces are those things that we are registering as being satisfying and also important to us as well. So they're the things that are pulling us into the organisation and sustaining this environment as being their employer of choice environment. And on any given day, there are going to be dynamic push and pull forces that might be playing out for people, but there is an overarching sense for people about whether I'm feeling more or less connected based on the proportionality of those push and pull forces. And so I'm not talking about the superficial part of this with managers and leaders, which often happens. So managers and leaders often sort of find themselves going, yeah, no, if my people are okay, I ask them, I say, how are you doing today? Or I say, hey, if there's anything that you need to talk about, let me know, I'm always here for you. That's that superficial politeness that happens in workplace environments, and managers and leaders who think that that is sufficient enough to understand the level of connection of their people always end up getting surprised when someone puts a resignation on their table. Yeah, and it's a bit of a shock factor. I had no idea. Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you do something? As opposed to me as a leader within the organization saying, hang on a second, this is part of my responsibility, is to be aware of and sustain high levels of connection across all of my teams, my team members, knowing that each of my individual team members have different circumstances, thinking and feeling at any given point in time. And so this universal sort of brushstroke sort of approach that we might take sometimes is not enough to measure and manage and understand how we effectively go about impacting connection. Again, very happy to talk to you in more detail about this. And again, on the right-hand side, there are 12 drivers of connection that you should be focused on. And in fact, 64 elements of connection that we encourage our clients to have deeper and more meaningful and more regular conversations with their people about on a semi-frequent basis throughout the year. Right now, if you've got the superficial hygiene one going on, that's okay, but you're likely to be shocked, or they're likely to be shocked when someone actually says, look, I don't want to be here anymore. So I'd encourage you guys to have a look at this for your own workforce. All right, I need to now move on to the detachment phase. So the detachment phase is the moment at which the push forces outweigh the pull forces for an individual. And it may be one element or one driver that do this, but it's significant enough where they register that this is no longer my employer of choice environment. And now I am actively feeling, I'm consciously feeling that this is no longer where I want to be long-term. The stage or the length of the attachment period varies. So you can't predict that it's going to be 4 weeks and 2 days. It will vary. Some people can stay in detachment for very extended periods of time, but what happens is their discretionary effort and contribution will go down, and they will become more aware of marketplace opportunities. And when one of those comes up, they'll then put their resignation and go in. There are other people who enter detachment phase where they may have an experience or a moment or an interaction with someone, and it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, or it's significant that they go, I am fundamentally not aligned with the values and the behaviors of this organization this moment, and I'm out of here. And they may actually put their resignation in on that moment as well. So it can vary in its length, but what happens is the push force it outweighs the pull force, and there is a pattern of push and pull for that individual that will lead to them making the decision that they're actually leaving the organization. Now, for us as employers, exit interviews have existed for the longest organizations have probably existed as well. And look, I'm not a big fan of exit interviews, let me tell you. I'm absolutely a big fan of an exit process that treats people respectfully, that demonstrates that we care for them, that we value them, that we appreciate the contribution that they've made, and helps them to build awareness of what has led to their decision to leave the organization, and helps them to be informed about where they should then move to next. Now, measuring detachment helps people to understand that. And so it helps the person who's leaving, but it also helps the organization to start trending and understanding the pattern of what the push and pull forces look like when people in certain roles or at certain levels or in certain demographic categories leave our organization. And so if we start collecting and understanding those patterns in detachment, and we create a better experience for people leaving our organization, we become far more informed, and we can start to watch the patterns of connection. So as patterns of connection, push and pull start to change to start to look like the pattern of detachment that job, that demographic starts to look like as they enter into detachment, it becomes a talent early warning system, risk warning system. And this has been very hard for our industry, certainly, but the wider human resources pursuit to have a lead indicator of talent risk, particularly key talent risk, has been kind of the holy grail, right? And how do we spot that? What do we do about that? If we start measuring consistently detachment patterns and we are also measuring consistently and in the same way connection patterns, then we have an early warning system that we can utilize. And so those drivers that I shared with you on the previous slide for connection, I would encourage you to think about, what do you know about those drivers as people are leaving your organization? From an employer perspective, from a recruitment perspective, my goodness, what we could do to be able to help build awareness of candidates as they are leaving organizations, to become more aware of what the push and pull forces were at the point that you left, to help inform them about the decisions that they need to make about the environments that they're actually going to choose to go to next, which would help us become better recruiters, right? So from the industry perspective, I've always felt that we've been kind of cornered into that position of sort of having candidates. We do our best to get candidate flow through to us. We're trying to attract it at all times, and then what we're trying to do is understand them to in terms of what do they want, and then we're trying to sell them on the features and benefits of the role that we want to place them into. But what's missing often is, and it lives in what's called Hertzberg hygiene two-factor theory, is that for any person at any point in time, there's push and pull forces at play, right? And there's the things I don't want and the things I do want. And historically, as an industry, we've been really poor at actually giving a balanced perspective or giving insights to what potentially lives on the what I don't want list that could create talent risk that could lead to early fallout and trigger your probation periods and guarantee periods, or would lead to a lower level of likely attachment potentially, and a likelihood that they wouldn't be a long-term sustained employee as well. And so I don't want you to discount the importance of understanding push and pull forces of employees for those reasons as well. And I see a real opportunity for the recruitment industry to get more involved in partnering with their clients to help them measure that at the point that they're leaving. Twofold: one, because it helps us get candidates, be aware of candidates that are coming into the market, be aware of positions that are becoming available within our client sites, as well as then helping our candidates become more well informed about where they want to go to next. And back to where we started this morning, if we also help our clients to improve the exit process, treat their departing employees with more respect, value them, respect them, appreciate them, then we have a much stronger likelihood that they will be advocates for us in the marketplace in that post-employment phase as well, which helps us then build that candidate attraction, employer value, brand value at the other end of the cycle as well. So I hope that you guys have been able to get an experience in me talking about this, that the three active and dynamic phases of the employee life cycle that we can be more aware of and actively manage and influence are attachment, connection, and detachment. But we also need to be mindful of pre-employment and post-employment as well, and how they all fit together. And considering this both from the perspective of us as an employer, but also now cycling back into that space of us as a recruitment provider as well. And I'm mindful of time, and Tony's going to whip me off in a moment. I haven't left time for questions, but if you want to ask questions, I'll stick around. But can I leave this for you to consider? Where would you define your relationship with your client at the moment, and where do you want to be? So are we more inclined towards opportunistic sales, in that we just sort of come across it and then we'll react and we'll provide it and we'll sort of flog them, and it's almost the person that's sort of driving up the highway and stops in at the drink stand or the fruit stand. For those of you that were around years ago, there was a chap who presented to the recruitment industry called Neil Rackham, and his work really resonated with me in terms of where we sit, in terms of the kind of relationship we want to have with our clients. And I think he called it, Tony, you'd be able to correct me on this, but I think it was death of a sales force. That sort of rings a bell. But his proposal was that middle problem solver. So we want to have a relationship where our clients keep coming to us with a problem, which is, I've got a vacancy, can you fill it for me? Where that is a shrinking market, because that will be under pressure to either head down the procurement pathway, high volume, low value, or opportunistic sale, or we'll be forced to move into the other end, which is that more strategic partnership end. But there's squash in the middle. I don't think that has squashed quite as far as Neil proposed, because I think that middle, that problem solver point, is where people come into our industry, in and out of our industry. They come in, low barrier of entry, they pick up jobs in that space, try and form some more transactionally sort of problem solver relationships. But there's a squashing of that, but there's more people coming into that. And so I don't think we've seen that shrink as much, but I'd be open to your input on that. Certainly, some of you may have developed a strategy to go procurement, low cost, high volume, and some of you may be wanting to push up into that strategic partnership space. What we've been talking about today absolutely lives within that strategic partnership space. So how we go about being mindful of this for our clients, supporting them to improve the way that they attach their new talent, the talent that we're placing with them, how they are mindful of sustaining the emotional bonds with that talent over an extended period, but then also what are they doing in terms of what are we doing in terms of supporting them when their talent is leaving them, to improve the process and the experience, but also to improve the knowledge and the awareness of those candidates, and hopefully attract those candidates to be our candidates that we can then continue to work with longer term. So I'm not going to spend more time because I think we're out of time, but that slide sort of helps to again, dig down into those concepts. And I hope I've referenced them during the session today for you sufficiently enough that those of you that want to know more, I'm very partial to a skim latte in the morning. I'm very partial to a red wine later in the evening. And I'm very open, probably tell, I can chat underwater with a mouthful of marbles, as my wife would say. And if you'd love to have a further discussion around this, very happy to do so. Can I just, as a final parting, because it's in the slides there, if you at the moment do pulse surveys or engagement surveys, or you've got clients doing that, I've got a list of watch outs. Given that a lot of organisations, a lot of HR teams make strategic workforce decisions based on aggregate workforce data, that is dangerous. We promote know your individual people. Yeah, so have a line of sight, measure, understand and influence the individual circumstances, thinking and feeling of each person that is in your organisation at each of the stages of the employer life cycles that they're actually in. So that last phase there, every individual's circumstances, thinking and feeling are different and require understanding and commitment from their primary carer to best form, strengthen and sustain and learn from the emotional journey each person experiences with your organisation. Yeah. And on that note, I want to say thank you. I know I didn't leave time for questioning, but I'm happy to stick around. So Tony, back to you.